Compared to the way day one of free agency looked for the Montreal Canadiens, it was a hell of a lot busier in terms of what was going on around the NHL and in the Canadiens' own backyard. Granted, we know today that Alex Ovechkin is coming back to the Washington Capitals for another season. We saw that Jakub Dobes got signed to a 3-year extension with Montreal. Rob Ramage is retiring, and it was the last day of Canadiens development camp in Brossard. So there was a lot going on. Beyond just that, I also want to talk about one of the little areas that not everybody is available to shop in terms of trying to find players for the team. And the Canadiens are working from a position of strength. And that's the key bit. So you know what time it is? To talk some puck. Welcome back to PuckTalk Montreal, everybody. I am, of course, Coach A on this July 2nd. And the biggest news for the Montreal Canadiens today was the fact that goaltender Jakub Dobes signed a 3-year extension for $5.357 million. No, not 5.375, literally 5.357. I know I had to check it 3 times because the number didn't make any sense to me. But it was more along the lines of staying within what the Canadiens had already established in terms of their spending. I'll get to that in a second. But how important was it to you for them to actually re-sign Dobes? For me, I think I didn't want to wait until next season when he was an RFA to go out and have to sign something. Do it now. He's still got 1 year left on his entry level. Then he kicks in the next 3 years. You're right as rain. And you could go from there, right? The kid comes in. He's happy. He's got his extension. He's going to be, paid very well. And he's going to be able to focus on his training without having to worry about what the next step is in terms of any type of negotiation. You know what the negotiation was? Him getting the Montreal Canadiens to the Eastern Conference Final. I think that's all the negotiation he needed to do or his agent needed to do. So good on the Canadiens on getting this done. And the way they did it isn't much different than what they did with Sam Montembeault. In both cases, Montembeault gets 3 years, Dobes gets 3 years. Now you're going to say that the money's different, but it's not. Because while Dobes is getting 5.357 and Montembeault got 3.25, it's the percentage of the cap that they're getting that's exactly the same. So I think in staying consistent, the Canadiens are creating an expectation, whether it's from Dobes or even down the road with Jacob Fowler. Entry level, bridge, long term, depending on how you work out. So good on Kent Hughes for getting it done. Good on Kent Hughes for creating a standard in terms of his goaltending. Now nobody's worrying about, what do I have to do? It's done. Move on. Now, another big tidbit of news today, not just the fact that Alex Ovechkin decided to extend for another year and come back to the Washington Capitals. That, it came as a bit of a surprise because, everybody last year was shaking hands and whatnot. And I think the Pittsburgh game was the one that kind of said, you know what, maybe he's coming back because he waved off Sidney Crosby. So he signs and he comes back. But the bigger question wasn't the fact of whether Ovi was coming back or not. It's what happened to Darren Dreger. Darren Dreger went on overdrive in Toronto yesterday, or on TSN, I should say, and said that it sounds like Ovi's career in the NHL is concluded. Now, let me paint a picture for you guys, okay? Because a lot of you think that, people that report stuff hear it from one person and then they just go out and blurt it. They don't. Guys like Pierre LeBrun, Dreger, Chris Johnston, any of the insiders that are out there, they always get information from more than one source. Now, when you got 2 or 3 sources repeating the same thing, you can go out and report it without worry, even if it comes up wrong, because you know what? You've checked your sources, you've gotten it from more than one person, you move along. And I think that's what Darren Dreger did here, because for all the time that Darren Dreger has been an insider in the National Hockey League, I don't remember him making a massive mistake like this one. So I don't know how long Dreger's been doing this. At least 20 years, I would guess, minimum. If that's the case, and this is the only mistake he's made in 20 years, how about we forgive him instead of going out there and reaming him on social media, right? There are a lot of people that went out there and started bashing Dreger because of it. Guys, it's his livelihood, okay? It's just like you going to work and somebody coming in and bashing you for your quality of work. It happens sometimes that you get information that you think is right, is corroborated by more than one person, and then ends up being completely different. For all you know, something happened on the veteran side. You know what? Yeah, bring me the contract. After Dreger said what he said. Nobody knows for certain. Nobody knows when Alex Ovechkin decided to come back. At the end of the day, he did. Dreger didn't get it right. We move on. It's the last day of anything that anybody's going to do in the National Hockey League, unless there's some kind of a blockbuster that comes up for at least the next 6 weeks. So how about we calm down a little bit, put on our baseball caps and our sunglasses, get the towels out, put on a little bit of sunscreen, and relax. Okay? I understand that you guys want everybody to be able to get stuff right, but somebody's going to get it wrong sometimes. It happens. Now, moving on, the last thing I want to talk about is Canadiens development camp today. Today was the last day. We had the red and white scrimmage. And before that all happened, actually it's after it happened, Rob Ramage decided to retire from the Montreal Canadiens development staff. He's been with the team for 12 years as a coach and director of player development. And I think that he's done a very admirable job between two different administrations, mind you. He was there with Bergevin. He's there now he was there, I should say, with Hughes and Jeff Gorton. So, congratulations to Rob Ramage on deciding to retire. He's earned every minute to be able to, retire. He's made his mistakes in life. He's paid for them. He's come back with dignity and respect, and he's done an admirable job for this organization. So good on him. Congratulations. Right off into the sunset and enjoy. That being said, that's not going to be the same thing that happens with the kids that were on the ice today, because it was one hell of a scrimmage. Now, I came out here and I told you guys straight up that this scrimmage doesn't really show you much. And in terms of guys like Michael Hage or LJ Mooney, it doesn't, right? Because you saw them last year. You know what you're getting. They're a couple of your top prospects, right? The same holds true for a kid like Owen Protz. While he wasn't as physical this year, he showed a little bit more how much he could carry the puck up into the zone, which is something you wanted to see in his game. Now, Protz is going to end up in the American Hockey League. Let's see how that translates. But in terms of the rest of the team, you got your first look at some of the guys that were drafted this year. You also got to look at some of the guys that you were hoping would be here this year, like an Alexander Zorowski, like a Cooper Cleaves, and others. And you know what? I wasn't disappointed. The speed and the pace that they played at was outstanding. And it surprised me because last year I found it to be a little bit slow. It was a little bit more wide open. There wasn't as much, physicality at all. There wasn't any speed in the game. It was slowing everything down, trying to make passes and look pretty. This year was a hell of a lot more north and south, and it was something to behold because Michael Hage, I think he got 2 goals and 2 assists in today's scrimmage. Now, granted, it was 2 25-minute periods split in 2, and if you want to watch it, it's available on the Montreal Canadiens YouTube channel. I wasn't going to put out highlights because there are a lot of them. They're long the way they were cut, and I didn't want to get into any trouble in terms of copyright. So if you want to watch the scrimmage and you didn't get a chance during the day today, go watch it on the Canadiens YouTube channel. But in the meantime, everybody played well, including the kid I know, Remy Jalina. I wasn't expecting much from Remy, to be honest. I thought he would come, do a couple of drills, but he kept pace with everybody on the ice, which I didn't expect. He looked physical. He got an assist on the goal by Parker Trottier today, and he really impressed me. Now, like I told you in my last show, I've got issues in terms of something he did in terms of his character. And that's me. That doesn't mean that he's the same kid that he was 3 years ago. But at the end of the day, from what I saw on the ice, if I was a Montreal Canadiens scout, I may not be giving him an opportunity to maybe play at the AHL level. But there's 2 things I'm doing here. I'm keeping an open mind, and I'm giving him an invite to rookie camp because he looked very good and deserves to have a second look and maybe, just maybe, a full game against a team like, the Senators or whatnot, whoever they play in the rookie tournament later in the fall. So good on Remy and good on all of them out there. The goaltending looked good. Alexi Cornway looked good. Quentin Miller looked good. There was nothing to be said here. It was a good scrimmage, a lot of action, a lot of speed, very impressive. Now, what does that translate to? Sweet bubkis. But like I was mentioning in terms of Jelena, sometimes you have one of these deals, you bring in an invite and he garners your attention. And that's when you move forward with another kid that maybe is a little bit under the radar, came from an unconventional path, like Remy, who came from the CCHL in Ontario to the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League to the NCAA, and now perhaps the NHL. All that being said, you never know where you're going to find the next little diamond in the rough, and Jelena could possibly be that if he continues to develop the way we see him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the end of the day, development camp tells us nothing other than you going out there, doing a couple of skills, getting tested in terms of what you can do, how far you can jump, how high you can jump, and all that other garbage that they test you for. But it also gives the team a look at some of the other prospects that they may not have seen before and gives them an impression and things that they need to look forward to in terms of the continued development of these players. Doesn't mean it's going to happen now. It's going to happen in the fall when they go back to their teams, like Hage in Michigan, or wherever else all these other kids are going, and we'll see how it goes. Some of them are going to end up at the AHL level. Others are going to go back to junior. Others are going to go back to the MHL in Russia. But at the end of it all, it was a good development camp, an interesting scrimmage, and now we move forward. And I really want to get into another subject because all this is cool, right? The Dobes contract, Ovi coming back, the development camp ending. But the one thing that I wanted to get to today that I thought was really important is another avenue for the Canadiens to get players. Now, we've talked about possibly looking at buyout candidates, and God help me, no, we're not going out to get somebody like Jonathan Drouin. But you never know who's bought out by another team who may very well be an interesting fit on your team if there's a specific need that you need to go out and get. If Jonathan Drouin was actually a good center, I might think about it, but he never turned out that way. He's been a disappointment. I'm not going in that direction. But the thing about this time of year is that day one of free agency is normally all about spending. And it's all about who got the big name, who overpaid, who had a need to fill. But the real story is usually what starts after the spending stops, because that's when your true math starts to show up. Now, granted, you're allowed to be over the cap in the summer. But right now across the NHL, there are teams who have spent themselves into a little bit of a corner. Some are already over the cap. Some are barely under it. Some still have roster spots to fill. And that's where the Canadiens can do a little bit of shopping and should start paying a little bit of attention. Not because Kent Hughes needs to panic and not because the Canadiens need to chase every available name, but because Montreal's in a position that not every team has right now. They've got cap flexibility. They have a lot of prospects. They have draft capital, and they have young NHL players. And most importantly, they don't have to make some kind of a desperate trade. And that's the key. When another team needs relief, you don't pay them full retail for a player that you might want. You pay them for the solution. So right now, what we're going to do is look at those teams that have a need or may need a little bit of cap relief. We're looking at why the Canadiens can actually negotiate from strength. And we're going to look at the names that could actually fill the need and make sense for the Montreal Canadiens in two major areas. Second line center, right shot D. But let me be clear from the start. This isn't about helping the other team out. It's about finding out what the opportunities are inside their problem, right? Now, here's the mistake people make after day one of free agency. They look at the players who signed, they look at who's left, and then they think the market is all over. It's not. The free agent market slows down. After day one, only normal. But the trade market starts to wake up a little bit more because once teams spend their money, they have to make their rosters work. They need to fit under the cap. They need to carry enough players. They need injury flexibility for the regular season. They need call-up space, and they need to protect themselves for performance bonuses. And that's where the pressure begins to build. The NHL cap ceiling for this season is $104 million. The minimum salary is $850,000. So when a team is sitting with one roster spot open and only $400K in space, that's not just tight. It's actually a problem. When a team is over the cap and still needs players, That's not just some kind of small problem. It's a trade signal. And the Canadiens should be watching that signal extremely closely because Montreal doesn't need to go to the market saying, please give us your player. They need to go to the market and say to themselves or to the other teams, we can solve your problem, but what are you giving us to do it? And that's a completely different type of negotiation. The Canadiens have three things that matter in this market. Number one, they've got cap space. Not unlimited space and not space they could spend recklessly, but enough room to be a problem for other teams. Enough room to take on meaningful contracts if a player fits, and enough room to absorb money without forcing themselves into an immediate matching dollar trade. That's a huge plus for the Canadiens. The second thing, they've got a lot of young assets. They have prospects, they have NHL ready depth, and they have players who can step into another team's lineup at a very low number. And that's exactly what cap strapped teams are looking for. They don't just need to dump money, they need to replace money with cheaper production. So that's where the Canadiens can be a little bit more creative. And the third thing, the Canadiens have patience. And patience is leverage. If a team like Vegas needs to clear real money, Montreal doesn't need to overbid. If Colorado needs to create breathing room, the Canadiens don't have to chase anything. And if Toronto needs to move salary, Montreal doesn't need to do them a favor. Kent Hughes can sit there and just say, we like the player, but we know why you're calling. And that's the advantage that he has over a lot of teams in the league. The Canadiens' biggest needs are clear. They need a legitimate second-line center. They'd like to get another right-hand defenseman, especially if the goal is to build a blue line that holds up against playoff forechecks. But the solution can't be just any name. It needs to fit the window. It needs to fit the team's identity. And above all else, it needs to fit the team's cap structure. And it has to make sense beyond just one headline. So let's do this team by team. The Vegas Golden Knights are the first team on the board. And they're not just tight. They're in real cap pressure territory. They're almost $6 million over the cap right now. And they're only sitting with 19 active roster players. That's the key detail. Being over the cap in July is allowed. That's not a problem. But being over the cap and still needing bodies, that creates a little bit of urgency. You know, Vegas has been aggressive for years. They acquire big players. They sign big players. They push money forward. And they operate like a team that believes that the window is always now. And to be fair, that approach has worked for them. But eventually, for teams like Vegas, the bill comes due. And this is where Montreal should be watching because Vegas has players who fit what Montreal needs. Here's a couple of examples. The obvious name to me is William Karlsson. Now, William Karlsson's not 25 years old. He's not a long-term building block, but as a short-term second-line center option, there's a little bit of logic here. He's experienced. He plays the middle. He has a two-way profile. He's played meaningful playoff hockey, and his cap hit is significant enough that moving him would actually help Vegas. That's what matters. And at $5.9 million AAV per year, I mean, it's just a one-year contract. Trying to get that would help a little bit in terms of, taking that money off the Vegas Golden Knights' hands. The Canadiens don't need another small move. What they need is a player who can change the lineup structure. Karlsson would allow Montreal to slot the rest of the forward group more comfortably. Nick Suzuki stays in his role. The young players don't get forced into jobs that they're not ready for. If Kirby Dach stays, he's not treated like the only answer if health and consistency aren't there. And the Canadiens get a veteran center who can handle hard minutes. And granted, he only played 14 games last year. And that's part of the caution, along with, his age, the cost. And because Vegas needs relief, Montreal can't treat this like a normal hockey trade. It can't be like, okay, here's a premium prospect and a high pick. If Montreal's taking meaningful money, the price changes. The conversation should be, we can take your cap hit. We can give you something useful, but we're not paying full value while solving your cap problems. And that's the big difference between a normal trade that you make and a trade when a team is in a bind, like Vegas. Another name you could look at is Thomas Hertl. People will naturally bring him up. Big body, center, playoff style player, offensive ability, checks a lot of the boxes. But the term and age make that a much heavier bet because he's signed through the 2029-2030 season at $8.14 million per season. That's not a casual acquisition. That's a major commitment. So if Montreal is looking at Vegas, Karlsson is the cleaner hockey fit. Hertl's the bigger swing. And the Canadiens have to be careful not to buy the name instead of buying the value. On defense, Vegas has some right shot names, but that market is a little bit trickier. They just re-signed, or they re-signed Rasmus Anderson. And the guy I'm looking at is Alex Pietrangelo. Now I know he didn't play much last season. He didn't play at all. He was on LTIR all season. But Pietrangelo is a right shot defenseman. And again, his age, health, and cap hit make it a complicated conversation because he's signed through next season at $8.8 million. If he comes in and he's injured, well, you're up Schitt's Creek without a paddle at that point. So as Vegas, the realistic Canadiens angle is probably go center first. Carlson is the practical target, Hurdle if you want to be a little bit bolder. And the negotiating message to Vegas is simple. They need the relief. Montreal doesn't need to rescue them for free. Then you take a look at Toronto. They're also over the cap, but the pressure on them is a little bit different because they're only over by a bit. They have 21 roster spots filled, so they need to create room. But it's not the same level of emergency as Vegas, and that's really important. You don't negotiate with Toronto the same way you would with Vegas. Vegas needs a real move. Toronto may need a smaller correction. That means the Canadiens should be very selective in terms of what they're looking for. And honestly, there's another layer. It's Toronto. They're a division rival. We hate the Leafs. You don't want to help Toronto unless the deal clearly helps you more than them. No emotional moves, no former Hab nostalgia, no taking a useful player just because the name is familiar. The question is simple. Does the player solve a real Canadiens need? At center, Toronto's got a few names. Colton Sissons, Jack Roslovic, Nick Paul, John Tavares, even Max Domi, although Domi is probably going to end up on LTIR to start the season. But not all centers are equal. If Montreal is looking for a true second-line center, most of the names are not clean answers. Sissons is useful. Roslovic has skill. Domi's played center in Montreal before, but it didn't really pan out. Nick Paul brings size and versatility, but they just got him. But are they the answer to the Canadian second-line center problem? Probably not. They're middle six options, and they're there to help a lineup, and they can give you a little bit of flexibility. But they're not the player you build the second line around. Tavares is the one name that has true second line center profile, but the politics and practicality of that are just a completely different conversation. He's older, and he's a major identity piece in Toronto. And unless Toronto's cap situation gets far more complicated, that's not where I would spend my energy first. But with Toronto, I'd look at right defense. And in their case, I'd be looking at Chris Tanev and Troy Stecher. Tanev is the kind of defenseman coaches love. Right shot, hard minutes, defensive conscience, playoff habits. But age and health have to be part of the evaluation as well. He, again, signed through 29-30 and at $4.5 million. So the cap hit is a little bit more manageable. But how old is he? Where are we here? Born in 1989. Jesus, the year I graduated from high school. Boy, do I feel old. So 1989, he's 37 years old. Yep. A little bit long in the tooth for me. So, maybe I don't look at that one as much. But the other guy I look at is Troy Stecher. Stecher is more depth than solution. So the Canadiens' approach with Toronto should be very disciplined. You don't chase, you don't overpay, and you don't bail them out. If Toronto wants to move a useful player and the price is softened because of the cap, then you listen to them. But it's not the team that you would target first. There are better pressure points elsewhere. Take, for example, Colorado. Colorado may be more interesting than Vegas because Colorado isn't over the cap, but they're very, very tight to it. They have just over $400,000 in projected cap space, and they still have one roster spot to fill. That means even a minimum salary player doesn't fit cleanly without another move. That's the definition of cap pressure, and Colorado has the kind of players that Montreal should be studying. For example, at center, the one that jumps off the page to me is Brock Nelson. Veteran center, size, experience, scoring history. He can play a top six role. But the question is age and cap hit, right? He signed through 27-28, and his cap hit is $7.5 million per season. If the Canadiens are looking for a short-term bridge at second-line center, in that case, Nelson makes sense. If they're looking for a long-term answer, he doesn't. And that distinction is really important. Nick Roy, on the other hand, is in a different category. He may not be a pure second line center people dream about, but he's big, he's a right shot, he plays center and wing, and he could stabilize the middle six. And his cap hit is much easier to work with. That's the kind of player who can quietly make a lot of sense if the acquisition cost is reasonable. At $3 million per season till the end of next year, why not? On defense, his dad played for the Canadiens at one point. Josh Manson is a big name. Right shot, physical, playoff style, heavy game. I love the way he plays defense. He gives you the kind of defensive presence that matters when games get harder. And that's exactly the type of profile Montreal has been talking about getting, right? Not necessarily a flashy player, but someone who could survive the wall battle, someone who could handle a cycle, and who makes life harder between the dots. And Colorado's cap situation could make that conversation possible. So if Kent Hughes, if I'm him, Colorado's high on my call list. Not because they're desperate like Vegas, but because the math is uncomfortable. And uncomfortable teams make very interesting decisions. Beyond that, you get to the next tier. And these are teams that are not necessarily in immediate crisis, but they're tight enough that one injury, one bonus issue, one extra roster need, or one more move can force a cap decision. Florida's the first one. The Panthers are under the cap, but only barely. They have a full roster, but very little room. And Florida has the exact type of player Montreal should love, Anton Lundell. That's the dream target from this group. Young center, already trusted by his coach, plays a mature game, can fit a long-term window, and can grow with Montreal's young core. If Montreal's looking for a real second-line center answer, Lundell's the cleanest profile on this board. But let's be honest, Florida's not going to give him away. This isn't a cap dump on that for their part. It's not a team throwing a young center into the street because they need $800,000 in space. If Lundell's available, the price is going to be real. But if he's not available, then you move on. Sam Bennett's another Florida name that fits the playoff identity. Heavy, competitive, center, big game. But the cap hit, age, and role make that a little bit different in terms of what the Canadiens are looking for. It wouldn't be a soft move. It'd be more of a declaration. And honestly, I don't know whether or not he'd want to leave. On the right side of the blue line, they signed Ratko Gudas, and that's the guy I wanted because the number is workable, and he brings a physical edge. He's got playoff personality. He's got the right shot profile that we're looking for. But again, he's not a long-term answer. He was just a tool, and a very specific one that we could have had short-term. If the Canadiens wanted a harder third pairing defenseman playoff-style insurance policy, then they may have considered that. Los Angeles is another team with very little breathing room. They have a full roster, but not much space. And Ken Holland, he doesn't like working without any cap space. So the Kings have useful players, but from a Canadiens perspective, the fit isn't as obvious as you might think. Scott Lawton can help. They just picked up Eric Holla. So, he's not going anywhere, but Lawton can help. But are those the players who solve Montreal's two big needs? Not really. They're more support pieces than core solutions. So I would keep Los Angeles on the watch list, but I wouldn't force it. And Minnesota's in a little bit of a smaller category. They're not in full cap crisis, but they're tight enough to monitor, right? They have players everyone would love, like Joel Eriksson Ek, big center, hard matchup player, two-way game, playoff identity. That's, again, exactly the type of center that Montreal would want, but availability is going to be the issue. There's a difference between a player you like and a player that a team is actually willing to move. Unless Minnesota is forced to a bigger reshaping move, that's probably not very realistic. So for this group, the message is very simple. Florida has the long-term center fit. Los Angeles has useful depth, but not the main answer. And, Minnesota's the pipe dream. Joel Eriksson Ek would be a great pickup. But in terms of the Canadiens, let's build a target board. Not fantasy, not names for clicks, but a practical Canadiens cap pressure target board. Number one, Anton Lundell. He's the best long-term fit. If Florida ever opens that door, Montreal has to be in that conversation, but not if this is an expensive target. You're paying for real assets here, and you're not stealing him, so you're going to have to pay up front. It's going to be expensive. The second name you look at, William Karlsson. This is the practical Vegas target. Shorter term, veteran, second line capable. He can stabilize the lineup, and because Vegas needs relief, Montreal can negotiate from a position of strength. The third guy you look at is Josh Manson. If the Canadiens want a right shot defenseman who brings playoff weight, Manson makes total sense. He's not the flashiest name, but he fits the playoff program. And Colorado's cap situation, that makes him worth watching. 4, for the same reasons as Josh Manson, Brock Nelson. Veteran center, short-term second-line option, good player, but not a long-term solution. It's a bridge move, not a foundational move. And the 5th guy on my list would be Nicolas Roy. Not the perfect 2C, but a big right-shot, versatile centerman who's easier to fit. If Montreal wants size and flexibility without breaking the asset bank, Roy is very interesting. So, and then, of course, you have Chris Tanev. Although he's from the Leafs, still, he's got a useful profile, right shot, good defensive habits. But again, his age and health make this a very careful evaluation, especially given the term of his contract. But because it's Toronto, that deal has to clearly favor the Montreal Canadiens. That's the board. And the big lesson in all of this, the Canadiens shouldn't be buying out from desperation. They should be selling relief to the other teams. That means the price has to reflect the situation. If Montreal takes a clean, useful player, fine. Pay a fair price. But if Montreal is taking a difficult contract, helping a rival, or absorbing money another team can't carry, that price really changes. And that benefits Kent Hughes because he doesn't have to give up as many assets as he normally would. So he has to stay firm. A smart trade in this situation has 3 rules. 1, you don't block the kids unless the player is clearly better. Montreal has young players coming. You don't use the cap space on a veteran just to create a bigger lineup jam. If the player is a real upgrade, or he isn't, I should say, you pass. If he is, you think about it without blocking the younger player. Second rule, you don't pay full price for someone else's cap problem. That's the mistake that rebuilding teams make when they're ready to turn the corner. They get excited, they get giddy, they see a name, they forget why the player is available, and if the other team needs cap relief, that has to be reflected in the deal and what you're paying. The third rule, protect the long-term ceiling. The Canadiens are not a second-line center away from pushing all the chips in. They're building something. So yes, you be aggressive, but it has to be intelligently aggressive. That means no reckless long-term money, no aging player at peak asset cost, and no panic move because the free agent board dried up all of a sudden. The right move is the one where Montreal uses its flexibility to get better without sacrificing the core of the rebuild. That's the sweet spot. So here's the bottom line. After day one of free agency, I should say, the Canadiens don't need to be desperate and make a move just because the fan base is hungry. They need to stay opportunistic. Vegas is a bigger cap pressure target. Colorado's a quiet team to watch. Toronto's over the cap, but Montreal should be very careful when helping out a division rival. Florida's another division rival, and they have a dream center target, but not necessarily the motivation to move him. Los Angeles and Minnesota are monitoring situations, but not really priority targets. And for Montreal, the strategy should be very simple. Call teams with pressure, ask about centers, ask about right shot defense. Don't chase, don't overpay, and don't forget the leverage that you have. Because cap space isn't just empty room. Cap space is a weapon. And if Kent Hughes uses it properly, this is where the Canadiens can turn another team's problem into their very own solution. That's how you find value. And that's how you accelerate without forcing it. And that's how you make a trade that doesn't, where you don't shit the bed and it's more than just a headline. And it's actually moves the Canadiens closer to becoming a playoff team. Now, if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop your target in the comments. Is there a team that I missed that you think the Canadiens should go out and look at because they're close to the cap? If you're Kent Hughes, which cap-strapped team are you calling first? Are you calling Vegas, Colorado, Florida? Or are you waiting for the next team to panic? Because after day one of free agency, the spending is done. But the pressure's just getting started. So thanks once again for joining us. And again, keep your skates down, stick on the ice, go Habs go.